did this unknown guy that the World Series of Poker commentators ended up calling Mr. Wu,
So respectful.
did he just make the perfect play against one of the greatest tournament players of all time?
I mean, yes. I think the answer is yes, Grant.
We're going to have to get to that.
Okay.
If you like what you're hearing, make sure you give us a like. Let's get to the hand, all right? Let's just quickly go over how we got to this absurd, amazing play that happens that might actually be perfect in every way. So Mr. Wu, who is known for his aggression and his sizing being pretty big, opens big pre-flop, and Chidwick decides to call out of the small blind with the ace-jack, and we end up heads up. All of that seems fine. If you want to hear more about that, check out our podcast. We go into detail on the flop, turn, and pre-flop in that. Wu continues on the flop where Chidwick has a very easy call. Nothing to talk about here. The turn is where things start getting a little bit interesting. Not only is it a second spade, but Wu pairs his jack. Obviously, Chidwick makes top two. Do you think the pairing of the jack saved Wu from this hand going differently? Because if he had missed, maybe he just doesn't. He continues and gets blown off the hand, or something else happens.
He might fire at least some of the time, and I assume when he does, Chidwick is check raising and the hand is over.
Yeah.
Like Wu is, and if it isn't, Wu's probably like making some psycho move in that's not going to work.
Right.
Right. Like he's not going to flat a check raise with nothing. So I don't know if he's actually going to barrel the turn anyway, but the jack makes it very easy to check back as Wu.
It feels like he picked up just enough showdown value, although when Chidwick calls on this very dry flop, it feels like the jack is usually not good anyway. Like, I mean, Chidwick usually has an ace.
You're hoping Chidwick has like 2 8s and is just calling once, but that's not super likely with the sizing. Is the
right.
problem.
You can hope that, but the flop is super dry. The sizing is big, and it's unlikely.
Agreed. But let's get to the awesome stuff.
All right, let's do that, because we get to the river, which Chidwick loved the turn, and as much as he loved the turn, he probably hates the river. I think it is the nut low card in the deck for Chidwick when the king of spades comes, because ace-king gets there, king-king gets there, queen-10 gets there, and spades gets there, right? And he was beating all of those things.
By the way, king-jack gets there too, except we're beating that.
Wow, good point.
Just saying.
So we were beating all of those things. Now we're losing to all of those things.
Yeah.
At least some of those things could be in Wu's range.
Sure.
Right? Still, we have a very strong hand as Chidwick, and he decides to go pretty big, betting 140 here. What do you think about that?
I think it makes sense. We're targeting those medium aces that Wu could have, like ace X suited, ace 6 suited, something like that, ace 8 suited. Just trying to get called by those things that may put in a value bet on the river, but might just check back on this relatively rough card. Like, I don't think they're going to bet. The bad aces are going to bet, but they might really call once.
Right, especially if Wu's a little stationy. You know, the aggressive players also tend to be a little stationy if you're going to stereotype somebody based on...
they don't believe anybody,
right?
Yeah.
So I kind of like the bet. Now the cogs start turning in Wu's head, and I was watching this in real time, so I had no idea what was coming, and I was just like, well... It's too bad for Chidwick that Wu doesn't have a stronger hand. I guess he's not going to get any action. But Wu didn't fold immediately, and I was like, is he thinking about calling? Is this guy going to call with just a jack here? I mean, he blocks queen 10, but that doesn't matter at all. Is he going to call with a jack here?
He can beat 6, 7 suited. That isn't spades. That's the only hand that a jack can beat, really, right?
And then the clouds parted. And Wu made what might be the perfect play.
The clouds parted like at the beginning of the Simpsons episodes.
Right, except it wasn't cartoons. It was real. I was there. I saw it.
The perfect play. He raises to 500,000.
He raises to 500,000.
Why is this perfect?
All right. The first thing that you might be asking, which is what I asked when we first analyzed this on our podcast, is wouldn't it be better if we had a spade in our hand?
Yes,
normally. If we had the 10 of spades in our hand. And sure, that would help a little bit still. Just a teensy tiny bit in case we don't really know what's going on as much as we think we do. But how does Chidwick ever have spades? Does it matter if we block spades? I mean...
If he can't have spades, we don't need to block it.
On this ace 4-5 with one spade... The ace is the spade on the flop, people. That's a big deal. Chidwick does not have ace X of spades in his range. If somehow he's floating with 2 back doors that include spades, it's almost always going to be nut spades. And guess what? The king of spades came on the river, removing that from his range.
There is probably a few spade combos that Chidwick at least possibly could have. The most obvious spade combo is 6-7 of spades. We're not sure he's even going to call this pretty big open from the small blind with that hand, but maybe. Maybe it's hard to imagine, but the queen 10 of spades, I guess maybe
The
probably
royal,
not.
the old royal. Yeah.
But the problem is Wu bets so much on the flop. He bets 56,000 into 98. These are not sizings that Chidwick is used to. Right?
on a very dry board.
Right. Like, you're usually just going to fold all this kind of stuff out when you're looking at the stack to pot ratio, and also Chidwick being out of position. He's usually just going to fold, not the 6-7 of spades, but something like the queen 10 of spades.
I would imagine Chidwick is folding all of those types of hands on the flop. As I said, if he has two back doors and with spades on the flop, it's almost always with the king of spades, which comes on the river, eliminating that possibility.
Yeah.
So it is possible that the very top of Chidwick's range is a set of fives, because I don't see him having a set of jacks, kings, or aces having just called pre-flop. I don't see him having ace-king having just called pre-flop, even though that's better than a set of fives, or worse than a set of fives. So fives and fours are like the top of Chidwick's range for the most part, unless he has 6-7 of spades sometimes. Can he even call with any of that? When Wu makes it 500K, can you really call in the main event when this guy with like a penny in his Hendon does this? Can you do that?
Yeah, I mean, he has essentially zero Hendon at all coming into this event, which means like he should really be taking this stuff very seriously and playing very careful. Now, Chidwick's been playing with him. Maybe Chidwick knows he isn't playing carefully, but if this guy isn't raising the river like a weird frequency, then how can you ever call with any of these hands? He just always has you beat in not really even almost in theory, but like nearly in practice. They just always have it here.
Right. I mean, I think that if Wu actually figured out Chidwick's range and realized that Wu, in fact, can have a lot of these hands that we mentioned Chidwick could not have, he can check back spades on the turn if he thinks, oh, it's a pretty dry ace-high flop. Chidwick's just going to call again with any of his reasonable aces that he would have called with on the flop. And, of course, I'm not getting him to fold a set of fours or fives, so I'll take my equity to the river and hope it works out.
Yeah.
Same thing could be true of queen 10. The big question is, could he actually get called by a worse hand? The answer is, we don't think he can get called by anything. So when Wu actually has it, it's too bad. But when you don't have it, it turns into a spot where I guess it doesn't really matter what's in Wu's hand. He just has to raise because Chidwick almost always has to fold.
Now, to be clear, if Chidwick is playing against another one of the online wizard type dudes, if he's playing against Ike Haxton,
Sure,
he's playing against Sam Greenwood, guys who have bluffs here, guys who are going to bluff raise because they've got a good blocker or because they can see the situation, Chidwick's going to call with a different range than this, which is maybe zero. There may be nothing in his range. He's going to find calls because he knows he has to be balanced enough to find calls. But he can be exploitative against a guy like Mr. Wu and fold maybe literally 100% of his range if he knows that Mr. Wu should essentially always have it or nearly always have it here.
Right. Chidwick is playing against an amateur in the main event, and he's playing that style, which is what you were supposed to do. I mean,
it just sometimes it bites you in the butt.
Because Mr. Wu is going to Mr. Wu, and
I mean,
it really might be the perfect play.
It's so beautiful.